thank you all for your cooperation. And without further ado, I'd like to warmly welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Tomas Sobotka, Deputy Director of Vienna Institute of Demography at the our moderator, Michael Herrmann, Senior Advisor for Economics and Demography at the UNFPA, to the stage. Please welcome them with a big round of applause.
So, hello everyone, good morning. It's my honor to give a keynote at this conference, and my keynote will focus on two interrelated issues. One, I will try to give a very high-speed overview of some of the key fertility trends and issues, which will also then give me an opportunity to discuss policies which are needed and which are being implemented to address low fertility rates. Okay, I don't see my presentation yet online. Now it comes. There we go. So this is my agenda in a nutshell. And without much ado, let me take a very high-speed tour through some of the key low fertility trends. One thing is not surprising to you. It has been mentioned by many speakers. We have an emergence of extreme lowest low fertility rates in some countries and regions globally. But the interesting thing is that sometimes the shift to low fertility or extreme low fertility comes after a period when fertility rates seemingly stabilized at some low level. So we often see periods when fertility rates are relatively stable, followed by periods of relatively rapid change and often unexpected change towards lower levels. This is what happened not only in countries with relatively moderate fertility, but in the recent years, this happened, for instance, in China, where fertility rates after a long period of relative stability dropped from around 1.5 to total fertility level of 1.0 in the last year. Also, countries which were often seen as relatively higher fertility places within the low fertility world, and which were often given as examples of countries with wonderful family-friendly policies, such as the Nordic countries in Europe, have seen substantial drops in their fertility rates in the last 15 years, as you can see in this figure. The other interesting feature of fertility trends is that often countries which are more diverse, like the United States, which had special subpopulations with higher fertility rates, often saw sharp declines in fertility rates among the higher fertility populations, as you can see in the example of Hispanic women in the United States in this figure. In line with this trend towards very low fertility rates is another key feature of current fertility trends, and this is the continuing trend towards ever later timing of parenthood, with the mean age at first birth increasing almost without interruption in high-income, low-fertility countries over the last 4 decades. And now in some countries, we are really approaching the age at first birth, which means that some couples will have difficulties to get pregnant and will face infertility issues. South Korea is at the forefront of this trend, with the mean age at first birth now around 33 years for mothers. And that's the average. So for every woman who gives her first birth at the age of 28, there is another woman who gives her first birth at the age of 39 to get this mean age, just to give a sense of this figure. In line with this trend, the one population group which have seen fastest and sharpest fertility declines is the group of younger women. And even in countries where fertility rates for several decades were relatively high among young women, there has been a collapse of early childbearing. This is the case, for instance, of South American countries, which used to have a special pattern of high fertility rates among young women with lower education for many decades, and this pattern is gone now because fertility rates has collapsed among young women below the age of 25 in the last 15 years. Also, fertility preferences are changing. In the past, we knew from surveys that most young people are expressing an ideal family size or desired family size around 2 children per woman. This is no longer taken for granted. Current surveys of fertility intentions, especially when they allow more ambiguous answers, as in this case of the Generations and Gender Survey in Austria, show that many young people are not sure about their fertility desires. And when given the option of saying that they are not certain, or that they can say probably yes or probably no, they often choose these ambiguous responses about their fertility intentions, as is very clearly illustrated for young childless women and men in Austria. In countries where marriage is very closely connected with reproduction, as is the case in South Korea, we have seen a rapid increase in the number of young women and men, but especially women, who are saying they don't plan to get married in the future, or that they are not sure whether they would like to marry in the future. Again, especially in East Asian countries, but to some extent globally, more young people, when they're unmarried, they don't have a partner, they are living single lives, they don't have intimate lives, and they don't have a dating partner, as is very clear from this graph for Japan, where over time, the share of young people who are saying that they have a dating partner has been declining over the last 4 decades. Intentions are being shifted to later ages, but we know that many men and many more women who say they plan to have a child after the age of 35 or around the age of 40 will not realize these reproductive plans, partly because they are facing infertility, partly due to health issues, lack of partner, and other limitations. So this is also a kind of warning sign for us that it's good to know about fertility intentions, but the older the partners are, the less likely, especially women, are to realize these plans. And because more people are planning to stay childless, more people are not realizing late intention plans, we see a rapid increase in the share of childless people. Again, East Asia is one of the hotspots where the number of childless people in their 30s, for instance, women at age 35, has been increasing, and now in some countries reaches more than 4 out of 10 women at age 35. And we know from surveys and from data that many of them will not have a child after that age. Korea is at the forefront of this shift. We see a rapid increase in the number of childless women, permanently childless women, and it's not only due to a sharp rise of non-marriage, but increasingly also because more women who are married are remaining childless. Some of them by choice, some of them due to constraints they are facing, increasing infertility. We also know from surveys that different views and attitudes of younger people towards reproduction are changing. Reproduction is increasingly seen as optional, uncertain, delayed, negotiated between partners, and contingent upon individual circumstances. We know that more young people are lonely or they don't have partners, as I mentioned, but we also don't fully understand yet what the new digital era and the amount of time young people are spending on social media means for their family plans and means for their views and attitudes towards family. We know that younger people, younger generations are growing up slower, that they take more time to enter partnerships, to start family life, to start intimate lives. But we also know that children are conspicuously absent in their lives, and we still don't fully understand what does it mean when kids are not present on their social media feeds and in their surroundings and in their families. But we know for sure that young people have higher bars for the things which they think are important before they start marrying and becoming parents. So the kind of demands and expectations, what does it take to be a parent, is increasing. At the same time, young people are facing more of the new pressures, and they express more negative outlook about the future. This is partly because of objective economic circumstances, including unaffordable housing in many high-income countries, which young people clearly feel. But it's also partly because of the permitting negative views and pessimistic views about the future, which affect younger generations. And nowhere this is more clearly illustrated than in the case of Korea, where younger generations see very limited possibility for upward social mobility. They experience competitive pressures. And this is all, according to some research, also linked to their fertility intentions, which are lower among people who perceive stronger competitive pressures. I don't need to say again anything about extreme low fertility rates in East Asia, but let me show you this snapshot, which kind of took me by surprise, even though I am used to many different numbers. These are districts in Korea with the lowest fertility rates, and we see total fertility rate of 0.3 in one district in Busan, which is as low as it can go. You see a picture of this district. It's a kind of central shopping and party district and entertainment district, so no surprise, fertility is low is there, but still. East Asia, in many respects, is experiencing the same trends as all low fertility countries, but more pronounced with respect to childlessness, with respect to family trends, with respect to extreme low fertility, and with respect to changes in partnership and intimate behaviors of young people, and the disappearance of larger families. There are many factors which are also common across low fertility countries, but again, they seem to work strongly and have more consequences in East Asian societies. On the top of that, there are factors which are specific to East Asia, which seem to have a negative impact on fertility rates, including some issues which are related to the Confucian culture, to the marriage package, the strong connection between marriage and reproduction, and to persistent gender inequalities. Now let me go to the next topic of my presentation, just summarizing here the facts and findings about a new low fertility landscape. And let me now talk a little bit about policies which have been implemented and which need to be implemented. In the media and from policymakers, we often hear these kind of warning messages or quite serious messages about the threats of extreme low fertility and about the negative consequences of low fertility, saying we need more babies. So how is it? What should be the aims of family policies? Are pronatalist policies successful in achieving their aims? And how should these policies be designed? Before I start going a little bit deeper into the policy set, I would like to emphasize one thing. There are no easy and quick fixes to low fertility. There is no silver bullet, no one policy which could easily fix the issue of low fertility. And when thinking of policies, we really need to think also of these changing preferences and family size ideals of younger people. We need to think of the new landscape of delayed and sometimes very late reproduction. And this also means a lower relevance of the traditional argument of fertility gap between desired family size and achieved family size. We also know from the data that single-minded, target-driven pronatalist approaches based on providing just more money and financial incentives for families do not seem to work and do not seem to have a long-term positive impact on raising fertility rates. We also know that structural issues and barriers to reproduction are important in many countries. So it's not only the expectations, there are still real structural issues, including housing unavailability, which make barriers for many young people in realizing their fertility plans. And we also know there are many social policies which are needed to adjust and adapt our societies for the new reality of very low fertility rates. I would like to argue that we need to shift from macro level arguments about more babies needed to more focus on individual well-being and individual preferences. One thing just to remind all of us, family policies are here for many different reasons. And increasing fertility rates or boosting fertility rates is just one of these many reasons. So policies shouldn't be judged solely in how they are good or not good in achieving higher fertility rates. What we need for sure is more flexible and comprehensive policies across the life course, which take into account new facts about a higher diversity of family forms and arrangements. We cannot have one-size-fits-all policies focused, for instance, only on married people. We need to take into account that people have different preferences about how they want to go about having family and having careers, and policies should give them a choice and flexibility to push through these preferences. We also know that in most countries, young women now have higher education than young men, especially in terms of the share of university educated. And again, policies need to reflect this new education and their career aspirations. We also know how much economic uncertainty and other uncertainties are faced by young people today, and policies should also cater for those who are currently single, childless, and who may be planning to have a family in the future. And we know that delayed parenthood makes realizing fertility intentions difficult at later ages. That means not only providing access to assisted reproduction and infertility treatments to couples who are facing infertility and individuals who are facing infertility, but also a need to provide information, education, and medical support, screening, etc., for younger people so that they know what are the reproductive chances and realities as they are aging. Perfect, thank you. So there are many different possible policy responses to low fertility and different issues these policies can address, and you see them, some of them listed here. But the important thing to keep in mind is that policies are costly, and they will never fully compensate for the costs of children to their parents. So again, policies which try to focus solely on financial incentives are likely not to succeed because they will never give enough resources to parents to really compensate them for the full costs of raising children, not even speaking of opportunity costs, income lost due to parenting. We have in general increase in the amount of resources most countries were giving for family-related policies, but it's a little bit like running a big experiment because we also have big diversity across countries in where this money is going, whether more money is going for childcare-related policies or for financial-related policies or for tax breaks. So this also gives us researchers a kind of setup to analyze these effects of different policies. We have countries like Sweden and France, which put a lot of money into providing accessible, affordable childcare. We have countries which put very little money for childcare and much more on financial benefits for families. So what is the impact of these different policies on fertility rates? And here I have to say the issue is very complex, because we have many different policies operating jointly. So it's very difficult to analyze the impact of one individual policy. These policies have impact over long periods of time, so one cannot say from what happens in 1 or 2 years whether the policy is successful or not. People can change the timing of their births and then have fewer births in 2 or 3 years. We also have different target groups, and sometimes policies are not coherent together, and they may even run a little bit against each other. And we don't know what would happen without a new policy, how much would fertility decline or stabilize without any new policy which is being implemented. So these all issues have to be taken into account when thinking about new policies. When considering the experience of countries which have set explicit fertility targets and have made a consistent, concerted effort to increase their fertility by boosting especially family-related benefits and other policies, the record is kind of mixed and doesn't really suggest that there is a consistent increase in fertility, as in the case of Hungary, which now spends among the highest share of their government budget on family-supporting policies. So I mentioned there is a mixed evidence, but on the whole, in general, there is still somewhat positive correlation between the amount the government spent of policies, amount of resources, and fertility rates. So we still have some positive link on an aggregate level. When we dig deeper into the individual policies, different types of policies seem to show, in general, some positive associations with fertility rates, be it public spending on parental leave, on childcare, or on family allowances, but these effects mind you, are typically very, very small in different models. So the summary evidence, as I mentioned, is kind of mixed, although, again, expanded spending on family policies, childcare provision, and providing financial security are all important. But again, we need to keep in mind it's important how they are forming together a consistent package of policies, which is understandable for the parents and gives them support in different circumstances and situations. Looking ahead, so what are the key policies and adjustments needed for the future? Here I list 8 kind of issues or topics which I think are very important when thinking of designing policies for the future. Let me just mention some of them which I didn't mention yet. I think for countries in East Asia, anything which can reduce education, competition, labor market pressures, and gender inequalities is really of key relevance. Promoting reproductive rights at the same time is also important. Men are an important part of fertility decisions, so policies shouldn't be focused only on women's preferences, have to take into account also the life situations and fertility preferences and views of men. Policies may be increasingly localized. It's also local governments, city governments, and companies which have stakes in the future of different countries, and it's in their interest that, of course, they will have future workers and future populations. So this is a little bit of a provocation. Do we need a new policy paradigm? And I would never like to say that I'm a pronatalist, but this is, again, to provoke our thinking. Maybe we need something like a positive pronatalist paradigm, which would be a little bit opposed to target-driven top-down pronatalism we have seen coming in many countries. Or we can call it reproductive empowerment. A new approach which would be mainstreaming family-friendly, child-friendly policies at different levels of governance and thinking also about the labor market and education. But what's important there is that we are not scaring young generations. We stop talking about crises and grave situations. This will not make anyone optimistic. This will not give us more babies. We need to create a more positive vision of the future, which gives more hope and better visions for young people to think about their family ideals. Of course, yeah, I'm wrapping up. This also includes managing our expectations. We will not have a miraculous reversals of fertility towards much higher levels. We will stay here with the word of low or very low fertility rates, and fertility cannot go back to 2. So we need to make a lot of wider societal adjustments. Like in climate change policies, there is a lot of adaptation policies needed to the ongoing climate change. We will need a lot of social policies to adapt to a new world of low or very low fertility rates. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for this tour de force, I would say, of factors that contribute to very low fertility and policy responses. We don't have all that much time, so let me really open the floor maybe for questions, comments, if any. Yes, please.
Thanks very much for that presentation. My name is Gita Mburu, and I'm with the World Health Organization. I think one of the points that I think is really important, and we've made this point in a commentary that we published in the Lancet earlier this year, is that interventions that are focused on improving fertility should be stable in the long term. Because what we have seen in a number of countries is that they would start an intervention today, and within 3 years, the government, they don't see a response, right? And then they have a change in the policy. And that is a problem both for researchers, because you cannot really establish any positive relationship. We know that it takes a lot of time for interventions to have an impact. And secondly, it's a problem for people who are planning to have a child, because there is no predictability in terms of those interventions. So what our message is to emphasize that interventions need to be stable in the long term so that they can be measurable and also that they can be predictable so that they can inform cohort behavior, successive cohort behaviors. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments? Thomas, from your work, we heard it earlier in the introduction, a reference to Hungary, and you mentioned it as well briefly. And there seems to be some positive association between the spending and the fertility increase. Would you say that Hungary is a good example of an approach that works for, as a pronatalist policy?
No, I don't think this is a good example, because Hungarian policymakers were, I think the amount of resources and the kind of rhetoric about fertility increase is a little bit driven by this short-term consideration, as has been mentioned now by our colleague. So Hungarian government started implementing packages of new policies, to a large extent based on financial incentives and tax breaks, as well as loans for the newlywed couples, in about 2010, which was the period of the lowest fertility rates in Hungary. And in the next 10 years, fertility rates increased, which was presented by the government as fantastic, wonderful success of Hungarian policies. But if you compare Hungary to the neighboring countries, which didn't have such a boost of family-related policies, such as Czechia, Estonia, Austria, and some other countries in the region, they had more or less similar fertility increases in that period of time, which was marked by relative economic calm and stability. Plus, some of the Hungarian fertility increases were driven by short-term changes in the timing of childbearing. Some women had their children relatively faster. When we look at Hungary today, Hungarian total fertility rate is down to 1.3 last half a year. And it's as low as it was before the policy started. It's as low as it is in the neighboring countries of the region. So at the end of the day, despite all the government efforts and spending, Hungary cannot really be taken as a fantastic example of new policy approaches which would work for boosting fertility rates. At the same time, of course, policies are good for many. Some of these policies are good in supporting some of the couples who face, for instance, financial difficulties in deciding having a child. So I'm not arguing against these policies.
Yeah, thank you very much. But also some of these policies are, in our analysis, a bit problematic in the sense that they propagate rather harmful gender stereotypes.
Yes.
So they are often driven by a notion that if women just were to stay at home, if they weren't engaging the labor market as much, maybe they would have more children, and definitively that is not easily compatible with our vision of rights-based pronatalist policies. I have two more hands up, please. Three here, then Asa, then Gia.
Yes, thank you for a brilliant, inspiring presentation. I'm Anna Rocek from Finland. It could also be argued that many of the typical pronatal policies are kind of helpful for people who already have a child, at least in the Nordic countries where I come from. That's the case. So kind of they help with housing and childcare costs, but they are not sufficient to kind of inspire or encourage people to have the first child. And they are kind of not suitable as family formation policies. Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Anna. Let me take two more interventions and then ask Thomas to comment. Asa? You don't have a microphone.
Thank you. It is very fascinating. And having been a woman, having been able to nurture a career and also to have 3 children, I would say that personally, the single most important aspect for me has been to have a supportive husband who has been willing to realize and support my vision to have both my reproductive and productive rights realized. I don't quite see this in the models. I would like to hear your views about that.
Thank you. And one more, Gia, and then we'll wrap this up.
Many thanks, Sobotka, for your continued thinking on the topic. And in China, we have been using your position paper on policy response, and I have seen your continued thinking along the line. And my question really, I mean, thanks for, I mean, I like your concept of the reproductive empowerment. I think that's something new, but we have been working on family-friendly policies a lot. We have been talking and working on reproductive choices a lot by mainstreaming the tool. So what's new here in your new vision? So when you say reproductive empowerment, you actually talk about mainstreaming and family-friendly policies while supporting reproductive choices. So what's new here in mainstreaming this tool? Thanks.
Thank you. Thomas, you have final word. 2 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. So first about policy supporting first child kind of aspirations. Yes, this is something where all countries are a little bit struggling. Also, the Nordic countries, as Anna mentioned, we are really not good in providing good policies in supporting young, childless, single or partnered people who plan to have a first child, who plan to start parenthood. And I think this is, again, especially the case in East Asian societies. Many governments think that policies should be targeting people who already have a child to have their next child. It seems to be like a logical choice to support people having larger family after they start. But if we have very few people who start, there is no point about having policies supporting people who already have children. We need to have in the first place policies which support young people in forming partnership and parenthood. In Korea, more than 60% of births are first order births. So if we don't address the issue of people having first births, Korean fertility may decline even more than it declined in the past decades. Husbands, partners, of course, they are super relevant. And if there are no supporting partners, many people will not be able to realize their fertility plans, because when partners have competing or not complementary fertility preferences, they typically end up with having fewer rather than more births. But this is a difficult area for policies, especially in the era of more individualization, where we take it for granted that people have more diverse views about how many kids they want. So this issue of finding a consensus between partners about their family plans, this is becoming more tricky. And again, I'm not sure the governments can do much more than provide very family-friendly and supportive environment to everyone, also to male partners in going about their fertility choices. What's new about reproductive empowerment or positive pronatalism? Look, I don't have a ready-made concept of everything which can go into that. I use these terms a little bit to provoke our thinking and discussion, because a lot of current pronatalist policies are kind of having very negative views about people who don't reproduce and seem to be threatening people with their worries about terrible low fertility future and horrible consequences of low fertility. We know this is not working very well. So I think we need to start thinking about more positive vision of reproduction, which is really coming together in the package of choices and of being perfectly okay with people who are choosing not to have children and supporting their aspirations as well.
Thank you, Thomas, so much for the presentation, for your responses. Look, we took this presentation first as a keynote to open this meeting because it touches on so many issues that we'll be discussing throughout the next 2 days. We will go much deeper in many of these issues. There's no ready-made answer, but maybe collectively we advance, we come more towards the answer on these issues. Thomas, thank you for being with us. And with that, I would like to hand back over to Amy. Amy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sobotka and Mr. Herrmann, for this engaging and thought-provoking session indeed. So before we proceed to session 1, I'd like to invite everyone to about 30-minute coffee break. So we will convene at 11:15. Please enjoy your break, and I'll see you back at 11:15.